want to talk now about spirituality, self-growth, self-development. And I want to share this conversation in the context that, I've worn my heart on my sleeve, and I've gone through some struggles recently, went through some more serious struggles when my last marriage fell apart with kids and divorce and court and like all sorts of drama and pain. But I learned so much from it. I became a better person because of it. And I know your story pretty well, Derrick, and I know that you speak openly about it. And I just want to share this piece and ask some questions of you, and we can kick it back and forth. But I want to share it in the context for folks that feel like they're struggling or things are really hard for them, that, especially Derrick, when he was just like down in a very dark place and ended up in prison. I'll let you share the story. Like that's hardcore, brother, So no matter how hard it is for some people, there's always opportunity to take that pain and drive it into your purpose and become a better version of yourself rather than allowing it to break you. And because people are always like, oh, it's easy for you to say, John, or easy for you to say, Derrick, you guys got it all figured out, or what the hell ever. But really, nothing could be further from the truth, right? And we're all presenting great here on the show, la, 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 but we got our own demons that we're still struggling and battling with all the time. It's a constant struggle. And that's part of life. That's what makes it beautiful. So I want to share that in the context of like everybody, we all have struggles, we all have ups and downs, but when you can tune your mind to see these struggles as an opportunity for growth, God, the universe, whatever it may be, karma, it's reflecting back to you. And if you can look at it through that mindset, it not only does it make it easier to go through the struggle, because it's all happening for a reason. It's not happening to me. It's happening for me, so I can become a better version of myself, so I can be prepared for what's next to come. But you become a better person. And then when the adversity happens and the struggle happens in the future, it doesn't bring you down as much because you've already learned the lessons. You've already built up that armor, right? So one of the reasons why people can so easily get swept into this reactionary paradigm is because they don't even have the ability to not get reactionary with their own emotions or triggers. They're not rooted in like a spiritual grounding that when somebody says something, they get triggered, they get emotional, it turns into a whole, let alone on social media and arguing with the TV or whatever. It happens in our own relationships. So maybe you could just start by sharing, like, I know that you had a lot of challenges in your upbringing and with your father. And I know that instead of like facing that early on, you turned to drugs. So can you just share that story and then how it actually ended up transforming you and making you the person that you are today?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said, John, when we're faced with challenges, we can either kind of, grow through them, rise above them, or we can sink further. And sometimes we wallow in self-pity. And I feel like I definitely did that at a young age. Just briefly, for those who haven't heard me share this story, I'm 40 years old now, but 20 years ago this November, I got locked up at 20 years old, right before I turned 21. I'd been addicted to crystal meth for probably about 10 months before that, leading up to that. And then before that was, hooked on other substances and drinking all kinds of alcohol. And just, I went through basically a couple year period from 2003 after graduating high school and going to college for a little bit before I basically couldn't sustain it, and got sucked into the whole world of drugs and criminal activity and, just all kinds of stuff that I wasn't prepared for. And that came for me after spending my young life watching my birth father, do the same thing. I grew up, my earliest memories are my father's already in prison, and we're going to visit him in prison. He gets out every now and then, comes and visits us. Then the next thing we hear, he's back in prison, then he gets out. This was just a cycle I dealt with all of my earliest memories. By 7 to 8 years old, I absolutely remember being suicidal and being just completely depressed. And just, even if I didn't really maybe understand what that word meant, but just the idea that I didn't want to exist and that I didn't want to be here. I didn't really have the proper tools. I had my mother around, and she was trying her best to take care of her 3 kids with her ex-husband, in prison for his own drug addiction and all the trauma that comes along with that. And I didn't have the tools to deal with it. So by the time I got to my rebellious teenage years, that sadness transformed into anger. And I actually remember being at my grandmother's house. It was one of the times my father was getting released from prison. It was Christmas, and it was a big deal in my family because my father was going to be allowed to come visit my grandparents' house again for like the first time in 20 years or something. They had some kind of drama since before I was born. And so everybody knew this is like a big Christmas. And as soon as my family arrived and, my grandma opened up the door, I just knew right away, he's not here. Something's not right. Just the way they were acting. And shortly after that, I remember walking to the bathroom and overhearing my grandmother tell my mom, he's already locked up again. He's already, he's not going to show up. He's already, he just had a habit of falling right back into his drug addiction. He was dealing with his own trauma and his own pain that unfortunately he never dealt with before he passed away from a drug overdose. And I remember just going to the bathroom, 14 years old, after hearing that and just crying my eyes out, staring into the mirror and just being like, fuck this. I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. And just like, I swear I said those words, and just this kind of like shell of hardness I attempted to form around me. Of course, there's still that hurt underneath, but that was really the beginning of my destructive period, I think, up until me getting locked up. 14, 15, 16, 17, all through high school, junior high, I start getting into fights, start getting tickets, etc. I was still an intelligent kid in advanced classes, graduated high school early. I graduated the first semester while all my friends were still in school. I was going to college, but I was also just miserable. I was just angry. I was depressed. I hated seeing happy people because it reminded me of how miserable I was. And then, as I said, by the time I graduated, I discovered alcohol. That turned to drugs. And then I ended up locked up at 20 years old. And when I got locked up, I wish I could say that there was some sort of, big moment. I guess there was in some ways, but really I just felt like I had no other choice. Like everything I just described, I knew what my father's life was like. He was institutionalized from going in and out of prison, and he was just, just traumatized and all this stuff. And I knew I didn't want that. And I felt very much like I was such a hypocrite. I was so angry at him my whole life. And then now I'm getting arrested for drugs. And I didn't have any kids of my own, but I did have a very young little brother, 6 years old, 7 years old at the time. And I remember kind of having that moment of feeling almost, like a father figure in that way of like, dang, I'm leaving him behind in the same way that I felt left behind. And all of those feelings and emotions were enough for me to be like, I got to get my shit together. I can't do this. I could clearly see there was two paths in front of me. And one was the path of familiarity of what I used to call the family tradition, going to prison, drugs, alcohol. It's very prominent on both sides of my family, going back at least 3 generations from all sorts of trauma. And I was like, I could continue the family tradition, or I could try something else and see what's over here. And so while, like I said, it's 2 paths, 2 choices, ultimately it felt like there was no choice. I had to change. There was no other option. It was, I guess that's what people consider rock bottom, right? It was like, that was what I felt like the lowest of low. My family couldn't help me. My girlfriend couldn't help me. I'm facing at least, I got convicted, felony drug possession, 2 years sentenced, and I was going to do at least a year of that. And in that place, it's just like, there's no other choice. I can just sit here and be angry. I can sit here and be sad. I can become a better criminal, which is what some people do when they're locked up. Or I can really figure out like how the hell I got here and make whatever choices I need to do to make sure that I don't come back. And it wasn't just like, just like that. I did a full year and I got out, and I only lasted 6 months before I went back. For another 3 months, they sent me back. And then, so I ended up doing in the end 19 months in Texas state institutions, between county jail, Texas state prison, things like that. And yeah, so between 2005 and 2008, I was just bouncing in and out of that world. And I was still learning at the time. I got into meditation, got into prayer, started to do a lot of trauma healing and opening myself up spiritually, where I never had been very much open at all. In fact, I was very much like anti-God, anti-religion. And I still am very much anti-organized religion, but I wasn't open in any way. That all started to change once I got locked up. And yeah, so I mean, I think that we each get faced with different decisions, whether it's what I just described or something more traumatic, or, something else. And it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, they're all challenges that we face as human beings, and we have to decide what really matters to us. I just recognize that spending my life behind bars, that's not what was for me. I had no idea this was going to be the life before me. I wasn't an activist in any way when this was going on. I had no intentions of being an activist. This was nowhere in my mind at all, this reality. It was just, I got to fix my life. And once I did that and I got out, all of these beautiful things that are now a part of my life started to present themselves. I got out as a felon. I had the experience of being a felon and started to go down that rabbit hole. And eventually, like you said, I found Ron Paul, and the rest is history. But this traumatic stuff happened well before that. And so I think that whatever challenges you face, you have to find that strength within yourself. And there's nothing you can really do, whether you're talking about drugs, whether you're talking about people who are just living unhealthy, whether they're just not content. A lot of people aren't using drugs, they're not gambling, they're not addicted to sex, they're not, they don't have any of that sort of stuff going on, but they're just not happy. They've got all the appearances of happiness. They've got the house, the cars, and the typical American dream we're all sold, but they're still not happy. For some people, that dream fulfills them, but I think there's lots of people who chase these things because they're shown them through media and propaganda, but ultimately they don't have that spiritual element and that sort of being content with themselves. And that took me a long time. The root of all those problems I described for myself was self-love and self-worth. That I had none of those things growing up. And it wasn't because I didn't have a mother showering me with love. She definitely very much did, and did her part to like try to be there and be mom and dad to me and my brothers and sisters. But I just didn't have it in myself. And part of it was related to my father, but ultimately I had to accept it's like, he's not going to give that to me. I can't sit around and wait forever and expect that. And especially since he's passed away, it's like I had to find peace within that. I have to find some level of self-worth in here to give a damn about my own life. And when I was very young and I was dealing with all that depression, I had none of that. That's why I was suicidal. That's why I did a lot of self-harm and cutting myself and drug abuse and things like that. And it took a long time. And I'm not going to sit here and say, even today, that things are perfect, right? Like all people, I face insecurities and my own challenges if I let myself go down those roads. But I've learned as an adult not to avoid those things, but I've learned practices that for myself kind of keep me focused on that and not allow myself to get sucked into judging myself and comparing myself to other people. And just really honestly, I just trust that God, creator, whatever people want to say, put me in prison for that reason, so I could go through that. And then I could be here sharing the things I have now. And I just trust every day that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And the opportunities that are supposed to be before me are going to present themselves. The people I'm supposed to meet, I'm going to meet them. The people I'm supposed to connect with, there's nothing I can do about it. It's going to happen. So I just have to wake up every day, do my best, and just keep going forward.
Well, you're doing a pretty damn good job there, Derrick. And I appreciate how you're vulnerable and you share all that. And I know that it's really fulfilling for you when you share that. And there's folks in the audience that come up, or you get messages about people that are struggling with addiction and some pretty serious trauma. So thank you for sharing that. Let me ask about emotions. As you know, I was a pretty heavy kratom user for quite some time. And then even when I was a light user, when I stopped, it was a couple years ago that I took a very large break, and then I went to Confluence that Zek would put on. And Alex Zek's on point too. And I think he really, I wanted to bring him up to try to shift the conversation, but I had a different angle. But when it comes to like not being political and not being swept into all this reactionary stuff, he identifies people just not being rooted in a sense of self and a sense of empowerment, self-belief, knowing oneself. That's why they can just have some identity impressed upon them, because they don't know their true identity or their true power that lies within all of us. A lot of people have lost their way by design. But I went to Confluence, super transformational. It was not this most recent one. It was 2 ago. It was when the eclipse was taking place, and I had quit kratom for the first time. And I was like 1 or 2 days into it. And then I was at the event, and it was a 5-day event with no kratom at all. And one of the biggest things that I recognized when I started fully feeling my emotions again. Now, mind you, I would feel them before and would still have anger and some sadness here and there, but it was kind of muted. And now kratom serves a purpose if somebody's like really, really, really in a bad spot and they're lashing out or they're abusing substances that'll kill you, right? But if you start to become, more balanced, then I believe that it actually is holding you back from feeling those emotions, because those emotions really have a reason. And so that's kind of where I'm at lately with some of my struggles, is doing everything I can to not avoid or numb those feelings and emotions, even though they can be strong and painful, and to sit with them, because that's really where the growth takes place. And as I shared in my lessons earlier, it's like, if you don't take the medicine and feel those emotions, understand what can I learn from this in the moment, it's just going to cycle back and teach. It's going to give you the opportunity to learn over and over and over. So I know that you had a lot of pain, and you can even pinpoint like that moment in the bathroom. And then you started anger and all this stuff. And then the drugs probably and the alcohol were so powerful for you because it numbed the pain. But
Oh
then I
yeah,
guess in prison, you didn't have the ability to numb it anymore. So you didn't have much of a choice. But can you talk about the
exactly.
role emotions and nowadays, obviously you've done so much work, but I know that strong emotions still come up today in the present moment.
Sure.
What kind of modalities or tools do you use to not only learn from the emotions, but not let them take control?
Yeah. So first off, John, really appreciate you sharing about your kratom use. And man, it's I know that's a struggle. That kratom is a tool. We both have told people that over the years, but it's also a really difficult addiction to break if people get hooked on it itself. So I applaud you for recognizing that it can numb you. And that's, I think, ultimately what we do in different ways. People who, whether they smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol or use kratom or just scroll endlessly, it's
Yep.
different methods to try to avoid and to numb things, right? And you're totally correct. I think the main reason that I had a success story is because there was no way for me to avoid myself any further. That doesn't
Mm.
mean, of course, everybody who goes to prison has success stories. You still have to make that conscious choice. That I was going to mention that earlier, like with my father. He just, there was nothing I could do, the lawyers could do, my grandma could do. Everybody pleaded and cried and told him how much they love him and they want to help. He just didn't have the strength within himself to decide that his life was worth something different. And he wasn't able to do that. You have to find that within yourself. So I think what does help, though, in my case, was that I was free from all distractions. As crazy as that might sound, being in a place like prison, I mean, I started meditating, I started journaling every day, and I still do. I don't journal nearly as much as I probably should, but I do write a lot of my own thoughts down and things like that, and practice meditation. And that was really useful for me to just kind of slow down, especially because at that time I was literally coming off a lot of heavy drugs and I needed just time to kind of get clear headed again. But I think the point here is that whatever practices you can find to not numb yourself and to actually feel the things that are going on inside of you is important. And I know also, I would say that this is something that we as men struggle with even more specifically, because a lot of us men grew up with other men showing us examples that talking about your emotions means you're weak, or
Mm.
it's not something you're supposed to do, or we all have different upbringing. Some people grow up in homes where the communication is yelling at each other, or the communication means slamming doors, or the communication is nothing. You just don't talk about it. You put on a smiley face all
Mhm.
the time, and you kind of repeat those things. And so as men and women, we learn not to talk about our emotions or to avoid them. I was absolutely self-medicating. That was for sure what I was doing. I mean, there was plenty of times when I was on heavy drugs and the people I was using with even would say, "You don't seem like you're happy." And I was like, "I don't think I am. I'm just like stuck in this. I didn't know what else to do." But there were times when the drugs felt good and I was like, "Oh, so this is what happiness is like. This is what I've been looking for." And I had to eventually, of course, find that happiness just in a sunset and, a beautiful day and time with family. And it took years to do that. As far as modalities and things, what I mentioned, I think is still heavily instrumental for my life. And I encourage others, get a journal, a diary, whatever you want to call it. Get a place not a place that you have business meetings in, but a place that is exclusively and specifically for you to go to write your thoughts down when you need to. And especially, I would say, in the times when you're feeling stressed out by your husband or your wife, or by your job, or by your kids, or by some idiot on the internet, it's good to take a breath, pull away, and write these things down, and kind of look at your thoughts. At least I find it helpful for me. Like when I can take them out of all this chaos in my head and then put it down on a piece of paper and then look at it and read it, it sort of allows me to take it in even deeper and kind of pull away from it a little bit, look at it, okay, so that's what's going on in my head. Now I can sort of feel a little less chaotic, and then I can move a little bit more centered from that. And I think over time, these things become habits. It goes from being like a practice that you have to put a lot of effort and intention into, like, oh, okay, I'm getting angry. Okay, hold on, take a deep breath. Don't react and say the first thing that comes to my mind to my wife because she's driving me nuts. Just take a breath, and maybe even not say anything. And I'll just be super real and give an example of, just really briefly, of last week with Miriam, my partner. For those who've met Miriam, we were together, and long story short, she was communicating something to me, and she wasn't doing so in a rude way or anything, because she really is just very kind in the way she communicates. But my initial ego reaction was to just like, what the heck is she saying this, and just start cussing her out in my head, or just feeling very defensive, like, oh, like, why is she saying this to me and this and that? And I didn't say anything of it. And this is, I think, part of that process. Younger Derek would have just said the first thing that came to mind and said, what the fuck are you talking about? Who are you? Why are you telling me this? You don't know anything. And all that reactive stuff. Instead, I sat quietly, and there was that part of my brain or my soul that felt that. And I let him have that space. Okay, you feel that way. You're feeling triggered right now. You're feeling like, why is she saying these things to you? Just breathe with it. Just sit with it. And then I just sat quietly. And that was, I'm sure, awkward for her, of like not knowing how I was feeling and not saying anything. But I felt like it's better for me not to say anything right now. Just breathe, just keep breathing. And then with time, I took in what she said, and what she offered was actually very valuable and useful. And when I, reflected on it, say, okay, I had to like kind of have a little mini conversation with my ego inside my head and say, look, I get that this feels uncomfortable for her to say that, but she's coming from a good place. And you know what? She's right. She's actually right in what she's saying. So it's okay. Let it go. And I guess that could be part of my inner child that just feels like, hey, somebody's attacking me. But it just had that. And this is all happening within like a moment, right? Like this is, and I think that's the kind of thing, is the more these practices become regular to you. Buddha said it best, like your habits become your destiny. Your habits become, I can't remember the full thing, but it's like, okay, your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits, and your habits become your destiny.
Nice.
And that's like, so it starts just here, it's a practice, but then the more you get used to it, it just becomes second nature. And in that moment, I had to go there and like, okay, feeling some tension rising up in my chest. Don't say anything. Reflect on this. Keep reflecting. And even if my end result was, I don't agree with what you said, at least I can say that and communicate it in a way that's not coming from this super reactive place. I can say, hey, baby, I hear you. Thank you for communicating with me. I don't agree with that. This is how I feel, right? And that all takes work and energy and time and effort. And I guess it's all up to each of you. Do you care enough to want to be in that place? I know for me, it felt really good. I was like, holy crap, like this feels good. Oh my God, we're not arguing. I'm like actually rising above that, ego stuff, and just sharing, saying, I gave it a little bit, and a little while later I communicated her, said, baby, the reason I didn't say anything is because, and I just explained everything I just did. I was like, I was feeling this way. I didn't want to say anything back, but now I'm hearing you, and you're right. You're correct. Thank you for being patient with me and giving me the time to process that. I love you. And that was a lot more valuable than just the way it has gone in the past when I was younger and much more reactive, or the way it could have gone, because if I say something like that, then she's probably going to react. And then we're just locked in this ego battle instead of us like hearing each other. So yeah, there's little things like that I try to do. And obviously I'm human like everybody else and not perfect. And there's times where I do the exact opposite of what I just described. But I think it's all about that practice and trying to make that become part of your daily life.
Come on. We're finally growing up, Derek. That's good stuff. Good stuff. And, just like we run away or numb our emotions, when you're in a good relationship, or at least it has the potential to be a good, healthy relationship, but we're all, grew up in trauma-based society, and our parents are going through their own struggles, doing their best. But oftentimes when things get real with a partner, people have the same tendency as though when the emotions get real, they want to escape it. But like I shared with my lessons earlier, it's like, if you abandon a relationship because someone's reflecting back some pretty serious stuff. I had something really hard hitting reflect back at me recently, like a few days ago. And just the same, I just sat with it, and I was like, oh, I immediately would have resisted and thrown back in the past. Well, you do the same kind of thing, that kind of bullshit response, instead of just being like, okay, that's your experience of me recently. And it's really hard for me to accept that that's how I've been showing up. But that's where the growth has to happen, and we really got to quiet our ego in order to even be able to get into that space. But if you abandon a relationship just because it gets challenging, because somebody's calling you out on your bullshit, then the next relationship you get into, you're going to manifest and attract somebody that's ready to show you that mirror just again. You just got to look in the mirror and just face the facts. And it's all just to become a better version of yourself. Okay. All right. Before we let you go, let me ask you about this. One thing that's helped me immensely, and it's actually been humbling, because I'm still not sure intellectually where I'm at with the whole Jesus Christ. And then you got like the Gospel of Thomas. And obviously there was some psyop, or very likely some psyop with the Council of Nicaea and and Rome and the authorities, that there was a radical message, I think, that's a more radical message. It's radical as it is what's in the Bible that Jesus says, right? Like in the red letters. But I think there was a little bit more to it. But I'm also like, because then you got Paul, the Apostle Paul in Romans, and it kind of shifts the message away from the works, which was James, and it's more to just having faith and accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior, right? I resisted that a lot as an anarchist, like, what does it even mean for me to have a Lord, right? But the humbling aspect of like just accepting that I believe that I am here on this earth to carry out the will of God, to create this heaven on earth, new earth, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't even have to be in Christian terms, but there's this creator, there's something bigger. And we have obviously have gifts, communication, the way that we think, being able to like draw a crowd and lead people, right? That's a gift. And I feel that we have an obligation to the creator, to our fellow human beings that all have divinity within them, to carry this work out. And that's actually been something that's really helped me immensely in dealing with some of my demons, dealing some of my vices and bad habits. What do you think about that relationship? Like as anarchists and freedom people, there's a resistance to giving our life to something bigger, but how does the role of a divine purpose and doing God's work, so to speak, what is that? How does that work for you? And what are your thoughts there? What comes up for you?
So I have a lot of thoughts about Christianity, which I won't be able to share today, but I put some of them in the 16th episode of the Pyramid of Power that people can check out about religion and secret societies. But a lot of what you said, I agree with, John, as far as like, thoughts and concerns about the Council of Nicaea, the changing of the books by the hand of man, the idea that Paul maybe have sort of co-opted the message and took it in a different direction, as well as interest in conspiracy theories around Christianity. Was Jesus actually a mushroom cult? Was Jesus a real person or not? Was it really Mary that was leading things, and it's actually the patriarchy that changed that over time and made the church about popes when it was actually women, leading things? There's a lot of theories and a lot of interesting books and documentaries out there about them. I don't know if they all can be true, but I do find it fascinating. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to understand it. By no means an expert in any way, but I grew up in a Christian home. My mom, I literally wait when I'm here visiting my mom, I come downstairs and she's reading her Bible every morning. Like, this is her tradition, her practice, and the younger version of myself tried to debate with her and tell her what would have tried to say, hey, Mom, have you ever heard of the book of the Gospel of Thomas? Have you heard of this book or all these extra books? You're only getting part of the story. And I do believe that. But also at the same time, I've learned, like with my mom, like, you know what, this is something that whether I fully agree with it or with all the questions I just mentioned, it's something that's bringing her peace. So I'm going to just let her have that peace. I don't need to sit here and like debate her about it and try to get her to understand it from the way I do. And so that's one thing, is I think I've come to play more of a place of acceptance of like, if that's what makes someone happy and brings them joy, then I can understand that. And then of course there's the other intellectual side of me that does want to understand it, like practically, logically, right? But maybe the connection to God isn't meant to be understood logically. I also kind of have space for that in my mind, that maybe it's true that man has corrupted the message of Christianity and everything that's entailed in there. And maybe it's also true that the Abrahamic religions are a tool of control. And maybe it's also true that the books were changed by the hand of man after the Council of Nicaea, and that Jesus's message, if he was real, has been corrupted. Like, I hold a lot of these kind of competing and conflicting thoughts in my mind, and I still find a lot of interest in trying to understand it. And that'll probably be a lifelong study. As far as like the message of Christ, the general belief in that, it's something that I do support. I mean, I think the message that I most support is the idea that the kingdom of God is inside of you. Like, and I think that's from the Gnostic Gospels. That's not in the mainstream Bible. I think that is a message that, if it's true, as these books propose, that Christ also said that, then what he was proposing is that you don't need to look outside for external saviors, including popes, priests, pastors, church. That the kingdom and the connection to the divine is something that is an individual thing. It's a personal thing. And, Christ was allegedly saying, go out though and spread the gospel and spread the message. But I don't think he said form mega churches and do, all the things that we're seeing today that I do have problems with. I think instead, like, the message was that there's a way for each of us to connect to the divine, to connect to the spirit, that is individual and unique. And of course, we can build community around it. I don't think that one needs to say, I give my life over to Christ or whatever the magic words are. And I don't mean that in a mean way. That's just kind of how I see it. That to me seems like a very man-made idea that say these words or you're not going to make it in and you're going to, be bound to burn in lake of fire forever. That's just not something I can jive with. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's what I'm going to be doomed to because I don't believe in that. But I do think for a lot of it, it seems like man-made ego and, just those are not characteristics that I would ascribe to an almighty, all-knowing, omnipotent, omniscient God, that this sort of say these special words, otherwise I'm not going to accept you and love you and welcome you into my kingdom sort of thing. I also have problems, with, not to get too far off track, but with this sort of patriarchal God as a he. I'm not saying God is a woman either. I just think God is probably beyond either of those designations, that we can understand. And so there's a lot of and him with the capital H and he and this sort of thing in Christianity and the Abrahamic religions in general that I have philosophical issues with. That to me, it's just like, and the way that I've been taught of the creator, what we call the Lakota word is Wakantanka, which means like the great spirit, the great mystery. That is what most native traditions teach about. It's this idea that the creator is beyond something that we can even understand. And the creator is the grandfather stones, it's the plant nation, it's the animal nation, it's the human nation, it's everything that we can see and that exists around us, even the horrible parts. And that creator breathed life into all those things. And so I feel like creator gave me a specific task, gave all of us a specific task, breathes life into us. And by protecting the earth, by recognizing the beauty in nature, by protecting your fellow man, and by being a good person, you are embodying, whether it's that Christ consciousness or just a respect for the divine, you're connecting to the creator. And so that's kind of more where I come from. That doesn't mean that I don't think that Christ doesn't have some things to offer or other things like that. But I tend to see I think people might put themselves in a box almost and think that if I'm not going into this church or if I'm not saying these specific words, etc., then God is judging me. And the God that I believe in, the creator that I believe in, is above and beyond those sort of human designations and judgments.
Love it. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think the whole Yahweh, Christian God, long white hair, beard kind of vibe is just something that makes it easier and people more comfortable to even contemplate what God is, female, male, or whatever. Yeah. And I think it's an energy and it's okay to not understand that. Like you said, like the intellectual part of us, that's also like an ego part. Like I got to figure it out. I got to have a grasp and control over it. But in all reality, I appreciate that in the Lakota tribe, it's known as a mystery. It is a mystery. And that's what's beautiful about it. And yeah, so the Gospel of Thomas does go deep within to it, the self-knowledge and kingdom of heaven within. That's also in the canonical gospels. When he was asked by the Pharisees, when will the kingdom of God come? And he said, no, it won't be like, look, here it is, or there it is. The kingdom of God is within you. Right. So it's there, it's in both. And I think it's a very beautiful thing. So, hey man, it's always great having these conversations. We could go on and on and on for hours on end, but I think this was really powerful. And I just want to say, I respect you and I really appreciate you and not only your contribution, but all of your growth over the years. It's been a pleasure to call you a friend.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. And the same back to you, man. Thanks for having me on. This is a fun conversation. And thanks everybody for listening. See you guys out there.
All right. Peace. All right. Thanks, Derek.